Manguddummaan qormaata ta'uu danda'a. Waa'een manguddoomoo haadha keessanii isin yaaddessee beekaa? Waa'een abbaa, abbeeraa, eessuma, adaadaa, akkoo, akaakayyuu fi abaabayyuu keessanii hoo yaada isinitti ta'ee jira? Dhimma manguddummaa fi manguddootaan wal qabatu irratti gaafii kamuu qabaannaan dhaabbanni Senior Linkage Line isin gargaaruudhaaf qophiidha. Dhaabbanni Senior Linkage Line dhaabbata isteeta Minnesota guutuu keessatti dhimma manguddummaa irratti tajaajila kennu yoo ta'u, dhaabbilee tola ooltummaa kanneen akka tireelisii fi ejentiiwwan biroo wajjin ta'uudhaan manguddootaaf tajaajila garaagaraa kennuudhaan beekama. Dhaabbata keenya biratti manguddoonni kamuu tajaajila geejjibaa, tajaajila mana jireenyaa fi inshuraansii fayyaa argachuuf hin rakkatan. Gargaarsi dhaabbanni keenya manguddootaaf godhu kana qofaa miti. Nyaata manatti namaaf dhiyeeffamuu fi oolmaa manguddootaa ilaalchisee odeeffannoo barbaachisu manguddootaaf barbaaduun gargaara. Gargaarsi dhaabbanni keenya manguddootaaf taasisu manguddoota biras dabree maatii manguddootaatiif boqonnaa sammuu kenna. Odeeffannoo dabalataatiif 8 duwwaa duwwaa 333 2433 irratti bilbiluu hin dagatinaa.
Dhaabbata Senior Linkage anas na gargaaree jira, isinis koottaa itti fayyadama.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Community Connections. Today we are talking mental health awareness as well as Pride Month. I wish you and yours a very happy Pride. We'll be talking to Ryan Fouts of Reclaim. He'll be talking about the work of his amazing team and how you can get connected and what true allyship looks like this time of year. Stick around, this will be an episode you won't want to miss. Ryan, I'm so excited to have you join me today on this episode of Community Connections.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Can you talk to me a little bit about your work with Reclaim Minnesota and your work with trans and queer youth here in the Twin Cities?
Sure. So Reclaim is a nonprofit organization, and our mission at Reclaim is to increase access to mental health care for queer and trans youth or LGBTQ youth, so that they may reclaim their lives from oppression in all of its forms. So at Reclaim, we focus on providing mental health care to queer and trans youth ages 12 to 25 and their families. So our major focus is on providing that direct mental health care to young people. So that looks like individual therapy, couples support, family support, group therapy, in addition to providing support options to parents and caregivers and other adults. And then outside of our therapy work, we also do training and consultation services to other providers in our community. So other mental health professionals, other businesses or nonprofits, to school systems, things like that, so that we can increase the number of people in our broader community who are equipped to provide good care to queer and trans youth.
Absolutely. Can you talk to me about how the work of Reclaim began? Because this is a very targeted, specific work that you all are doing.
Yeah, so Reclaim got its start, so going back in time a little bit, in the late 90s and early 2000s, there was a recognized need for some specific support geared towards LGBTQ youth. And so in that time, there were a few support groups that came into existence and some one-on-one therapy work that was being provided. And most of that work was being done within larger homeless youth service providers here in the Twin Cities. And those programs had some traction and had some support, but then when the recession of 2008 hit, unfortunately a lot of the funding for many of those programs was lost, and so the group support and the therapy support, a lot of it ended up being terminated with just budget cuts that were happening with a lot of organizations at that time. And so our Reclaim's founder, her name is Janet Bystrom, she is a social worker, and she was the one leading a lot of those groups and a lot of that therapy support. She turned to her community of friends, family, acquaintances, and she put out the call for support to her community. Literally, her and a bunch of her friends and family members were sitting in her house making phone calls. Hey, can you chip in here? Can you support this? And they were able to raise about $30,000 to get a fiscal sponsorship from another local organization to keep that work going of providing group support and some therapy to support to LGBTQ youth. And that was in 2009. And so we kind of consider that to be the birth of Reclaim. And it has grown from there since then. In 2012, we became our own nonprofit, and we've just been able to expand and grow and sort of increase our support over the years since then.
And a lot of the work of Reclaim, correct me if I'm wrong, is around helping sexual exploration, but also with mental health concerns, and then addressing pervasive trauma, correct?
Yes.
Can you talk about some of the ways that you guys do that specifically at Reclaim? I know we talked a little bit about some of the consultation support and things like that, but can you elaborate for me, Ryan?
Yeah, so I think there are two big reasons why folks reach out to us for support. One reason that a young person or their family might reach out is because that youth maybe has some questions or has some concerns about their gender or their sexuality. And, maybe everyone assumes they're a boy, but they're starting to really feel like they're not a boy anymore. And so they want to be able to talk with someone about their journey and about their gender. And so they will come to Reclaim and work with our therapists to just have that sort of deeper exploration into their gender or their sexuality, just to help them have tools and have resources and have a safe person that they can talk to really think through, what is my identity? What does that look like? And as I come to know more about myself and my identity, what does that mean for me in my world? And how do I engage with my family now? How do I come out? How do I sort of prepare myself to move through the world now that I've recognized my identity has changed in some way? So that's definitely a major reason that folks reach out to us. But, beyond supporting gender and sexuality, we're equipped to support young people with a lot of the sort of common mental health concerns that youth and young adults face today. Some of the big ones include depression and anxiety, as you mentioned, pervasive trauma. So that's another major reason that someone will reach out to us. They'll reach out because they're really depressed and they want to get support on addressing their depression. But they know that by coming to Reclaim, if they are, say, also non-binary, they know that by coming to Reclaim, their identity is not going to get in the way of their therapy. They know that their therapist at Reclaim will understand what it means to be non-binary, and so they're just able to focus in on addressing their depression and getting skill sets and coping skills to support that issue if they're in a space where they're not necessarily needing to work on their gender or their sexuality with us.
I think that's so important, and the specific target demographic you guys are working with, ages 12 to 25. I can think of how many things stick out right now. I'm in my mid-30s that took place during 12 to 25 and how pivotal that time was.
Exactly.
For you and the work that your team is doing at Reclaim, how did you guys come down to working with that specific age group of people?
Yeah, I think because, as you said, there is just so much that goes on in life in your teenage years and young adulthood. And I think from Reclaim's history, from when we first started, there has just been a pretty consistent lack of services for young people, especially targeting LGBTQ youth. There has been a consistent lack of services for young people. So I think as we initially got started in the early 2000s, it was a response to a very clear community need. There are very limited services for this group, so this is who we want to be able to target and support. But there is so much that goes on. Developmentally, your teenage years and your young adult years are very formative, and so it is a really important time in a young person's life to be able to step in and provide support, provide mental health care for them, to help them progress and develop and grow in healthy ways. If they are starting to experience concerns with their mental health, a lot of those concerns come up in teenage and young adulthood years, and so that's a really important time to be able to provide interventions around mental health to hopefully, help stop that mental health concern from being, something really traumatic and really concerning for them much later into life. So
I know that we've talked a little bit about pervasive trauma. Mm-hmm. Can you kind of talk to our viewers about what that is? I don't think people necessarily always wrap their brains around what pervasive trauma is and how it has a lasting effect on people.
Yeah, so with the community that we work with, serving LGBTQ youth, just by nature of who they are, being somewhere in the LGBTQ plus spectrum, they have experienced oppression in our society that is, structurally and systemically, our society is set up to more so favor straight people and to more so favor cisgender people. And folks who are cisgender are those whose sex assigned at birth aligns with their gender identity. So if you were assigned male when you were born and today in your life you identify as a male, that's what we mean as being cisgender. So automatically the young people that we're working with are experiencing potential harassment and discrimination because of this aspect of their identity, because of their sexuality or their gender. And so they might be experiencing harassment and discrimination at home or in their extended family. They might be experiencing harassment or discrimination or bullying in school. That's a very common issue, is that young people experience a lot of harassment and discrimination in school. If they're a young adult and they're working, their workplace could be a place where they're also experiencing harassment and discrimination. Mm-hmm. And then from there, if you factor in other potential identities that they have, approximately 40% of our population also identifies as a person of color. So those individuals are holding another layer of systemic oppression that they face, experiencing racism in their lives. And there's just a lot of research that shows that when you are exposed to violence, to harassment, to discrimination over an extended period of time, it physically sort of settles in your body, and it's almost like just a tension that you carry with you. And so we really just try to be cognizant and aware of that and give people specific skills and coping mechanisms to really be able to have a space to unpack that, to hold and to recognize that trauma that they're experiencing that unfortunately may not be able to go away because of society, but at least giving them tools and resources to navigate that and really promote resilience and growth and health for them.
Thank you so much for that, to be able to talk a little more in depth about that. I don't think people always navigate the scope of what that really encapsulates in our society day to day. Reclaim is actually offering one of the only financial accessible specialized mental health care to this population specifically. Can you talk about that? I know people sometimes hesitate to receive assistance with their mental health because they're worried about the cost.
Yeah, to give a little bit of context to that, so there's an organization, the Trevor Project, and they're a national organization, and their focus is on suicide prevention for LGBTQ youth. And they do an annual survey of the state of mental health for LGBTQ youth. And they haven't released state data for 2023 yet. Okay. But in 2022, it was the first year that they took their national data and divided it out state by state. And in 2022, here in Minnesota, of the LGBTQ youth that they surveyed, 49% of the youth surveyed wanted mental health care but were unable to get it. And then they looked at the reasons why that was the case, and an inability to pay for their care was, I think, reason number 3, if I remember correctly. So financial barriers are huge. So Reclaim has had a long-standing commitment to that financial accessibility piece. So what that looks like is if a young person or their family reaches out to us for services, we have an intake process and some steps that they go through. And if they have insurance benefits that they're able to use, then we'll use those insurance benefits and we'll take care of all the paperwork and process the claims, and whatever reimbursement we can get from insurance companies helps cover our expenses. If there are fees left over, or if somebody can't manage their co-pays or their deductibles for insurance and there's other fees left over, then we have what we call an equity-based sliding scale. And essentially what that looks like is every clinician, every therapist will just have a direct conversation with each young person or with each family and just talk about what's going on in your life and what other challenges are you facing. Our sliding scale is not based solely on income. So we don't have if you make $50,000, you should be able to pay this. If you make 60, you should pay this.
That's
we
very
really
important.
Yeah, we look at other things, how secure is your housing? How secure is your transportation? Maybe your parents make a lot of money, but you're also caring for a grandmother and an older aunt, and all of that, is factored into how much your family might be able to pay for services. So it's a sort of just a case-by-case scenario of understanding where the young person is at, where their family is at, and how much they are able to afford. And in some cases, it's a very small amount. In some cases, we don't charge the families anything for their care, because what we believe is most important is that they're able to get the care. And if they are able to pay for it, that's great. But if not, that's not a barrier for them to get their care. And since we've been able to really track this really well since January of 2022, and since that time, we've already forgiven over $42,000 in fees that would have otherwise been charged to youth and their families. So a really significant impact that we're able to make to ensure that people still get the care that they want and that they need.
That's so important. And then to just think about us coming out of sheltering in place with COVID-19 and all of these different things that have been taking place, how much people's mental health has been exacerbated because of whatever reason. Like you said, there's been so much transition. Some people are now caregivers. They may have transitioned jobs, education. They may be housed with an abuser. There are just so many different points of opportunity. Absolutely. Can you talk to me about how the work of Reclaim has shifted during COVID and what it looks like for you guys now?
Yeah. And it was really, the pandemic has been very fascinating for our work. And I actually joined Reclaim in sort of the middle of the first part of the middle of the pandemic. I joined Reclaim in 2021. And essentially Reclaim shifted to entirely virtual. So, before the pandemic, I would say that Reclaim, I think, kind of saw itself primarily as a Twin Cities organization, because before the pandemic, therapy was seen really as an in-person process. You would either take your car or take the bus or the light rail or what have you to the therapist's office. You would meet with your therapist and then go home. And the pandemic completely changed all of that. And, so we had to adapt very quickly and adjust to telehealth and virtual sessions. And it just required a ton of creativity on the part of both our therapists, but also with the young people that we were working with. Because like you said, you're stuck at home. A lot of the people we were working with were at home with, parents or other family members who maybe weren't super supportive. And so there were a lot of, people would have therapy sessions maybe kind of tucked in their closet because it's the only quiet place in their house where they knew that they wouldn't be listened to or, something like that. And same with our therapists. Our therapists had to set up desks in bedrooms and hall closets and, things like that to really create some spaces where there could be privacy and protecting all of that. So we've now adjusted and we've sort of gotten the hang of virtual therapy, so to speak, and now Reclaim functions in a hybrid format. So all of our therapists spend some of their time working in person with our folks, and then part of their time engaged in virtual therapy.
That's wonderful.
And I think one of the things sort of, I guess, a silver lining, if you will, that's come from the pandemic. Because we're able to use virtual telehealth, and because insurance companies are now supporting it and recognizing that it's an important tool for us to be able to work with the folks we need to serve, it's actually allowed us to expand our geographic reach.
Okay.
And so Reclaim is, we are steadily increasing the number of young people that we're able to serve throughout greater Minnesota. And that's actually something that we're committed to over the course of the next, several months, is to continue to build partnerships and connections to reach people all throughout the state. With the way that our licensing is set up, we are restricted to the state of Minnesota, so we can't serve, Wisconsin or Iowa. We can't serve any other states right now, but we can serve anyone who lives within Minnesota. And so we're working to increase those connections into those communities all throughout the state where young people and their families literally have no other option. There are no specific specialized resources in their community. So we're really trying to build those connections and reach young people all throughout the state.
While I'm listening to you, I'm sure you can see my face changing. I'm getting excited because I'm thinking of all the small towns along the outskirts of our city limits, like you said, that have no one doing this type of work or addressing any of these concerns.
Yeah.
And currently in society, we're at such a pivotal space. I feel like our queer, trans, as well as our LGBTQIA plus communities are being attacked at every angle. Civically, in our communities, being harassed within stores. So much so that our Attorney General right here in the state of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, has had to come out publicly and tell Brian Cornwallis, the CEO of Target, that he's willing, and his office is willing, to stand with them and not be bullied about taking down all of the Pride merchandise that they've been selling to celebrate this month. During this time, what can you say to friends or family members or people that are a part of the LGBTQIA plus community that are trying to navigate all of this new information that's coming in daily, or the consistent bombardment by a society that's not really willing to offer them humanity or respect at this time?
Yeah, that's a great question. A couple of thoughts I have. I think, part of the history of Pride Month is to be out, to be vocal, to be loud, to be sort of visible about who you are. And that is an important, thing for our community, to be able to step up and say, this is who we are, we're here, we're visible, we need you to see us, we need you to acknowledge us. But I think something that I always try to remind folks is that your personal safety is always paramount. So if there is anyone, but especially thinking about the young people we serve or other young people, like, if it's not safe for you to be really visible, to be really out right now, like, that's okay. And your personal safety is what's most important. And even if you can't be out, even if you can't be vocal right now, it doesn't mean your identity is any less valid. Just because you need to be sort of hidden and quiet and protected right now, your identity is still just as valid if you were, marching in the Pride Parade. So I think that's always just important to remind folks is,
absolutely,
regardless of how vocal you can be, you are still validly you, and your identity matters and your safety matters. I think, with all of the information, with all of the, all of the attacks, and, Minnesota has taken efforts to stand up to support trans rights and to support gender affirming care. I think with all of the information that's out there, it's important for folks to really be aware and pay attention to the information that they're receiving and hearing, and to really do their own research on understanding, so if we talk about gender affirming care, there's a lot of misinformation out there about what gender affirming care is and what it isn't. And
can you give a brief summation for those that may have never heard the term gender affirming?
Sure. So broadly speaking, gender affirming care is really a variety of interventions. It can range all the way from social support to, It can include mental health care, and it can include medical interventions as well. So hormones, surgeries, things of that nature. But essentially, gender affirming care is a blend of interventions to help someone work towards more congruence between their physical body and their internal gender. So when there's a mismatch between somebody's body and their gender, that's the purpose of gender affirming care, is to help those two sort of line up a little bit better. And it looks very different for every person. There's no, straightforward, direct sort of start and end process with gender affirming care. It's very specific to each person and where they're at developmentally and where they're at in their life. And I think the biggest piece of misinformation, so I'll just name it here, is if there's anyone who's under the age of 18 and they're wanting to pursue any form of gender affirming care, whether it's medical or mental health, they must have the permission of their parents or their caregivers or their legal guardians. Work cannot be done with anyone under the age of 18 without the consent of their parents. So that's a really important aspect of gender affirming care as well, is to involve the family, to involve caregivers, to involve adults as part of the decision-making process, especially if we're working with someone who's under 18. So, and unfortunately, that's a big element of the misinformation around gender affirming care, is that a 14-year-old just gets to make whatever decisions they want and everyone will just go along with it. And that's not really true. It involves the young person, it involves their family, it involves their medical team, their therapists, doctors. Right. So it's a very in-depth process built on worldwide national standards of best practice. When young people are hearing information about gender affirming care, it's important to understand where the information's coming from, and just to do more research and do your own sort of learning to make sure that you have a full picture of the information. So
I just was listening to you talk about earlier about the care that you guys offer for people, therapy, either one-on-one, family, or group therapy, correct? And so when I hear you talk about gender affirming care and how it involves so many different pieces of the patient that you guys are working with, it sounds so promising to realize that you don't have to go through what seems to be maybe a very daunting time by yourself.
Right.
That you don't have to be the one to keep explaining who you are, what these terms mean over and over to your family, that there are experts there to walk this path with you.
Exactly.
Which hopefully contributes to less people being harmed and leaving this earth sooner than they're supposed to.
Exactly. And that is another really key finding from research, is that if a young person has at least one supportive adult in their life, and it doesn't matter, it doesn't have to be a family member, it could be a family member, it could be friends, it could be a teacher, a school counselor, a therapist, but research shows that if a young person has at least one supportive person in their life as they're navigating their identity, their risk for suicide significantly decreases just by having one person that they know is in their corner. So like you said, that's a big focus of our work, is to really let young people and their families know, like, you are not alone. This is a tricky process. It might feel daunting, it might feel scary, but like you said, you don't have to go through this alone. There are we are here to provide that support and to link the people we serve with a variety of other community resources that sort of address different needs and different support, to really ultimately show our community, you are not alone. There is a large community out here that you can be part of, and there's a space for you in that community.
Absolutely. While I have you here, can you talk to me a bit about what allyship looks like from those of us that are in the surrounding communities, or that may be in relationship with someone that is a part of the LGBTQIA plus community and is navigating some mental health concerns?
Yeah. I think some of I think some of the aspects of allyship would include things like, doing your own education. And I think it's an important distinction between doing your own education and relying on folks in the community to help educate you. And this, for me, this extends to allyship with any oppressed community. Like, it's important to do your own education before, so I guess one example with our community, it being Pride Month, like one way where it would be important to do your own education first is if you don't know what Pride is about and you don't understand the history of Pride, instead of asking someone, hey, tell me about Pride, what is it, why is it such a big deal, explain this to me, help me understand. Take some time to go do your own research and understand the history of Pride and look back and sort of learn about how this came to be. And then once you have that, then you could connect with someone and have hey, now that I kind of have an understanding of what Pride is, what does Pride mean to you? What does it look like for you to experience Pride, to go to the festival, to, do whatever you do? So I think doing your own education is really important as an ally. Doing what you can to learn about some of the terminology, sort of familiarizing yourself with some of the different words that are used around gender and sexuality, but also with the word, with the various words and terms that we use, it's also just important to have that one-on-one engagement, because what a word might mean to me might mean something different to the person next to me. So it's also important to just have that sort of one-on-one engagement around what does your identity mean to you? What does that look like in terms of how you move through the world? I think allyship includes, supporting people in their journey. So if you know someone who is maybe experiencing a change in their gender identity, and maybe they're starting to use a different name, they're using different pronouns, they're starting to dress differently, supporting them in that. And using the name that they tell you, using the pronouns that they ask you to use. Those really simple things are really important. I think with that, I just had another thought that slipped. Doing the awareness within your sphere as well, bringing that awareness to whether it's your family, your coworkers, but also just increasing that knowledge base and sharing that information with other people is really important, so that, especially if you're working with someone who's maybe experiencing a transition, they don't have to be the one to always communicate that information. You can share that information on their behalf with other people.
I think that's really important and really helpful. I have heard as of late, people keep saying, oh, the terms keep changing. Everything is just, it's so much. And it's like, it's not a lot. And if you care, you will educate yourself.
Sure.
You will take on some of the emotional labor of yourself and start doing some of the work to help outside of, I feel like putting your flag in the window or, honking as you drive by certain spaces. We need to do a bit more. People are dying, and this isn't an issue that we can sweep under the rug.
Yeah, and I think too, in the training work that we do out in the community, people talk a lot about anxiety, and folks who want to be allies are invested in that, but talk to us about having a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear. People will say things like, I don't want to make a mistake. I don't want to mess up. I don't want to offend you. I don't want to upset you. And that's very much appreciated, that folks are aware and not wanting to make mistakes. But it's also, I always encourage people who are trying to be allies to acknowledge that you are going to make mistakes. And that's okay. You're going to slip up and use the incorrect pronouns for somebody. You're going to slip up and accidentally call somebody the wrong name. You're going to slip up and maybe say something that was possibly homophobic or otherwise offensive. Like, those things are going to happen. Everybody makes mistakes. I make mistakes. I will accidentally misgender people and have to correct myself. And so I always really encourage folks to it's great and important that you're aware that you're feeling anxious about that, but it's okay to step into that, because I talk a lot about intention, and if you're trying to engage with someone and have a conversation and learn and be a better ally, and that person can see your intention, like they'll understand and they'll acknowledge and they'll respect that you're not perfect either and you are going to make mistakes. But if that intention is there, that commitment to really come alongside and be a support to them, like that means a lot. And the mistakes are part of who we are because we're human, and if you have the right intention there, like the mistakes are okay and they're going to happen. So
I fully agree with you. Lastly, can you please share with us either a social media handle and or a web address for Reclaim so that we can stay up to date and connected to the amazing work you guys are doing, but also lend ourselves to support the efforts?
Sure. So we are on both Instagram and Facebook, but I would say Instagram is by far our most popular social media. And our Instagram handle is reclaim_LGBTQ youth. And then you can also find all of our information about our organization and about our work. You can find information about our therapy services and how to get signed up for our services. You can find information about how to support us, how to volunteer, how to get involved by going to our website, which is www.reclaim.care.
Wonderful. And then lastly, you all offer a newsletter that you are able to sign up for. Can you talk to us just a little bit about what's in the newsletter?
Yeah, so our newsletter typically goes out about once a month. Every so often, if there's like special events, we'll ping people a little bit more frequently, but you can typically expect to get a newsletter from us once a month. And usually what we include in that is updates about the availability of our services. So if, for instance, we're trying to recruit for a group, we'll put information in the newsletter about the group. And then it's also just a way to keep people informed both about events that we might have planned or sort of getting ready for, and also other events out in the community, with our community partners, other resources that our folks might be able to gain access to for other goals, other resources that they're looking for. So it's just kind of a way to stay informed both of what we're doing and sort of how we're engaged in the broader community and other ways that folks can get connected.
That's wonderful. So we have opportunities to not only lend ourselves in person to volunteer with you all, to give some money fiscally, to put our money where our mouth is.
Sure.
But we also can peruse the website and get more information and stay connected to all the groups and services, correct?
Exactly.
All right. Ryan, thank you for your amazing work across the greater greater Minnesota area. And I wish you a very happy Pride and a great start to summer.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. That is all the time that we have for this episode of Community Connections. As always, I am your host, Anna Orr, and I look forward to connecting again with you soon. Be sure to do the homework as Ryan talked about, and be sure to not expect someone else to do the emotional labor of showing up, standing with, and loving on our community. Happy Pride, and as always, I look forward to connecting again with you soon.